In many instances, to be an artist often means to be torn between two things. To be torn between one's own personal journey of self-discovery, the constant becoming, but to also be torn to the expectations that the people that connect with your art have of you and the art itself. This is a conundrum that strikes the modern artist in many instances. I would think the trajectory of how artists evolve is necessarily influenced by both. Being active in the marketplace means a certain level of being conscientious of what people expect of you because of what they've come to know about you. But it also means finding a way to constantly be true to yourself. And sometimes artists sacrifice being true to themselves in order to reach the supposed mass appeal. And very rarely, sometimes they choose their own authentic journey at somewhat the expense of the popular expectation. I am mentioning this because it rings to mind when I think of Thandiswa Mazwai. Thandiswa Mazwai is a South African singer, and to create a brief historical analysis, she was Kwaito's premier female voice, being part of Jackknife, eventually moving and shifting into Bongo Muffin, where the notoriety bubbled. And till this day, you can't play a song like Thandiswa. You can't play a song from Bongo Muffin without eliciting a certain sense of nostalgia from people who were there to witness the moment that Bongo Muffin climactically influenced South Africa. Now, with that kind of an influence, it is difficult to maneuver past the box that fame puts one in artistically. The box that says, make the kind of music that safely secures the fan base you've already established. But what does Thandiswa Mazwai do? In a moment of creative impulse, a moment of the urge and the calling of the times, she debuts an album that, together with talented songwriters such as the aid of Abanabafana Sipho Sithole, talented producers, she converges and creates an album that becomes a phenomenon of South African history, but a gesture into the possible future. I'm talking none other than the album Zabalaza. Now, Zabalaza became the album that shapes how Thandiswa is seen as an individual artist. She's seen as this artist that is able to creep outside of the expected Afro-pop box that says you've got to create cute and tidy wedding songs, songs that talk about the quaint obsession with love, songs that talk about this meandering feeling of being a black South African and navigating what love means. Afro-pop has become an exhaustingly formulaic genre because it relies on these same principles to constantly reinvent itself. Thandiswa kicks the door out of that prison, so to speak, and plays with something that steps its foot into the world of jazz. But jazz in a very partial sense. It's jazzy in the sense that it's warm, it's cozy, and it's able to bring us together. But it still captures commercial appeal that is able to directly affect the so-called everyday South African. When you echo the lyrics, Nizilibele uba nizalwa ngobani, most South Africans born between the 70s and the 90s will be able to tell you off the bat who sings that song, what's it called, what albums it comes from. So as a result, I'm talking about an icon, somebody who, even in the way that the story was being illustrated in front of us, many of us knew we were seeing, probably, and I hate doing this, comparing artists historically, but we were probably witnessing our own modern day Miriam Makeba. The parallels are irresistible, because just like Miriam Makeba, in the face of the so-called New South Africa, she defiantly and rebelliously chooses to play with sonic textures that nobody else was probably even capable of doing. Her homegrown history with politics, ekazini, with her family being politically affiliated, her own experiences were so fit for an album that truly spoke for the real issues, while still showing us this glimmer of hope, that it became an instant classic. To top that off, the second album, which is quite often the pressure with the artist, further takes it into that direction. She goes into the world of indigenous isiXhosa music, so to speak. She shadows, she is mentored by abantu abafana noMama Madusini, God bless her soul. She taps into the historical archive of black women performers, vocalists, instrumentalists, of what many would call ethnomusicology, which is just fancy academic talk for the music of our people. Thandiswa is able to bridge this gap in a way that is still commercially viable, because the lyrics given to her to speak, the lyrics coming out of her tongue, still resonate in a way that is very accessible. There's no typical jazz snobbery about it. There's a very everyday feeling, a kind of everyday feeling that one would associate with abantu abafana noHugh Masekela. It's good enough for the jazz crowd, but it's great enough for everybody else. Ipokwe, the second album to be specific, goes into a direction which arguably is more spiritual. It's mystical. It plays with the idea of Bungoma. It narrates ancestral communication. It talks about her own anxieties, her pains, her yearnings. Not only on an individual level, but generally, just feeling the spirit. She takes a bit of a break to the, woeful cry of fans. And what was interesting to me is when she returned with Belete, it almost felt like she lost herself in her pursuit of telling our history. She literally does an album of jazz covers, of South African jazz covers. And for me, Belete was interesting because I think it was the first time where I was realizing that this is the inevitable journey of Thandiswa Mazwai, but it is also a journey that means something very fundamental to her career. Thandiswa is choosing to be the kind of artist that cradles history. And when you are that kind of artist, you forego trends to go to something deeper, something in people's DNA. And so on a commercial level, you will lose the pop market. You will lose the popular appeal. And in a way, she does. She loses all the popular appeal in order to educate both the old and a newer generation of black women learning how to be radical about themselves to the history of South African jazz. She does this successfully, I think. Here's my theory. Because of Twitter. Who would have guessed? Her Twitter engagement is one that is ostensibly, clearly, confidently feminist. Thandiswa comes out as a bisexual. Thandiswa champions the rights of women continuously. She gets involved in drags and tours with people who continuously show the visible signs of patriarchy, are ignorant. She chooses to be something more than a regular artist. She chooses to be a social commentator. And with that, the era of King Ta is born. King Ta deliberately, as a way of shifting the non-binary conversation, as a way of saying women are kings too. That the idea of a queen should be put to question. That in an essence, I'm as much as of a man as any other man can be. And with that, she becomes something beyond the music. She becomes fucking iconic. With her own little cult following of women who live by her every word like the Bible. Beautiful to see from my eyes, because what it is the burgeoning of a kind of femininity that's moving us towards the horizons of change. She's one of the few artists of our times who has absolutely no interest in taking part in the classical female gaze dialogue that is authorized by patriarchy. Then she takes a break from music again. Fans are waiting, bated breath. Now remember, she's got two fan bases. The historical fan base that knows her as Thandiswa from Bongo Mafia, the everyday person. And now she's got the cult following. What can she do? And I think the reason this album took so long is possibly because of that question. Now that one is a star, but also one is a voice, what happens to the next album? Do you choose to dedicate it to the stardom or to the commentary? Let's talk about it. Sankofa comes through, 2024. The meaning, the title of the album itself is a super departure from anything conventional. If one is familiar with the term, it means to go back and retrieve. So again, Thandiswa is choosing to let go of the stardom in order to preserve the history. In other words, this is not going to be the album that people can sing in their weddings. This is not going to be the album that people resonate to on a general level. This is something different. This is something that is practically the most radical departure outside of her regular fan base. Interesting. With Sankofa, she's literally doing that. This is the ultimate expression of Thandiswa, bringing us full circle as a people, forcing us indeed to listen, if we will, if we can, to the state of where we are as South Africans. Now, I'm going to be real here. This album is not for the layman. It isn't. I mean, if you're looking for the way Kungakona Thandiswa, you're not going to find her. You're going to be lost in a symphony of very high art. You're going to be lost in a place that is more reminiscent of Enduduzo Makatini album than it is of a typical Kwaito album. I had a problem with that at first because as a millennial, I have an attachment to Thandiswa's pop persona. I'm attached to the Thandiswa that was able to be on a song with Kabelo. I'm attached to the Thandiswa that was able to become somewhat of a club bopper. But that Thandiswa is gone. Now we have a grown woman, a mother to an adult daughter. We have somebody who, you know, the closest thing South Africa has to Beyonce is probably Thandiswa Mazwai. But the difference between Beyonce and Thandiswa Mazwai is Beyonce chooses the stardom, whereas Thandiswa chooses the history, the significance, the storytelling. And as a result, she loses all pop appeal in order to become iconic in a different sense. Iconic to a kind of mature crowd that is in a stage in their lives where they really want to contemplate on the deeper things. So this project in a nutshell, from its opening, where she tells us about Masisabele, to it going into the negotiation with what's going on in South Africa's political turmoil, is a love letter to our struggle. The songs can get somewhat monotonous in the sense that they all kind of carry a very similar melodic scope. But in a way, this linear journey feels very deliberate. Because South Africa politically is not in a diverse place. It feels narrow. And I think Thandiswa is trying to speak to us through this narrow passage and infusing the utmost confidence in ourselves through this narrow passage. What I love about this project is that she does not leave out the lover girl. The fact that as much as she is a hard speaker of the truths that matter, she's also a woman navigating her identity in falling in love. Thandiswa is able to convey the most powerful words, or at least her songwriters are. My first listen to this project, I really felt maybe she could have crossed over a bit by roping in writers with a sense of pop sensibility to get a little jiggy, to also try to pull in a crowd that doesn't yet feel the need to focus on some of these more serious issues. But that's just me. And I, as a fan, have to understand the journey of Thandiswa and admit and accept when it diverges. So for me, this project represents that, a divergence. Because if you ask most people who love Thandiswa from a popular place, this album sucks. But if you ask her cult following, if you ask the people who are there, patiently listening and following her as she takes us through some of the most powerful narrating ever, then this is another step into South Africa's hope. So there you have it. How do I rate this? Do I rate this from a popular angle? Do I rate this historically? What I try to do with these reviews is I understand the artist historically, and I try to understand what they're actually trying to do and how it's actually playing out for them, commercially, culturally, and musically. So with that being said, let's learn from Thandiswa Mazwai's defiance, because with all the youthiness that she's left behind, she's making music for grown folk. And I love that, because pop culture tends to obsess around the youth. To a point where I would go as far as saying pop culture has become capitalism's project at conditioning young people into its own limiting grounds. So when artists choose to no longer make music for younger people because they're older, they choose to defiantly spread themselves out in a way that won't be viable in typical places. Thandiswa has now made herself niche, but it is great because her story starts from a pop place, and you can't take that away. And I feel that this album is ironically the artifact that AMA 2000 will use to find their history. Maybe she might have named it Sankofa in a coy way of saying, let's bring the younger people full circle to their history, and let's take the older crowd into a reminiscent, nostalgic trip into the sentimental values that we all aspire to reach. So ultimately for me, sonically, this one is a 7 out of 10. It's a 7 out of 10 because I don't think there's a song that will resonate beyond the moment on a level of like charting, or like you think back and you go, oh man, Zabalaza has songs that we're able to play today. Even Ipokwe has a song or two. And I think with each and every album she dropped, she stopped making music that tries to become more than about its time. So as much as this project doesn't carry a brilliant musicality that defines it as a classic, it is not by far. But what it is a testament to artistic bravery. I think this will be one of those projects that we go back to and we can't help but understand the times that it was made in. And as much as I don't think that there are songs that will probably like live on beyond the moment of this album, I think what the album is a way to say, why does that even matter? Who and what are we really following? The art or the artist? Because if we're following the art, then what this is a window to where the art is. But if we're following the artist, then the baggage of their historical, you know, bottom line creeps in. I can't help but do both. I can't help but want Thandiswa Mazwai to play around with a piano song or two or more, as she's shown to try and play with, but to take that seriously. To not only just be a mother to a new generation, but to be that relatable older woman. And seems like she's not interested in that. What she's interested in is her people, her ilk, her message. So this album is a memento to artists learning how to choose themselves. So on a deeper level, I might even give it a lower rating. But on a sentimental level that takes out the market analysis, it's a classic to her own heart. But the beautiful thing about capitalism is that most likely more people care about Thandiswa the person than they actually do about her actual music. And in a weird way, the music is now a footnote to somebody who's becoming a kind of political activist. That's weird for me to take in, because it now means that we live in an era where you could make somewhat basic music but be extraordinarily influential on the level of engagement, that the engagement becomes the thrust to how long the music is appreciated. But the one thing I do know, and I will say, and if you're watching this, Sissy, with all due respect, the music here is an expression of where South African jazz is, but I really feel like it lacks a unique and individuated sense to it. Therefore, like I said previously, it could easily be a Nduduzo Makhathini album with Thandiswa as an accompanying voice. And I feel like it is also this change of circle, this embracing of jazz in a deeper sense that takes it there. So without any further ado, that is my feeling, my sentiments about Sankofa as an album. It is artists choosing to follow their own path because they've sacrificed so much of themselves for marketability to get to a place where they can be free to do that. I fuck with that. I can't say no to that. My name is VJ, the brother from the ancient mother. You're watching The Headspace. If you like this kind of shit, this kind of speaking on the music, something that goes a little bit deeper than just a personal opinion, something that tries to strike a chord with where we are socially and politically, then this is the podcast, this is the channel for you. Subscribe if you haven't. If you already have, you're the reason we do this. Thank you so much.